So I'm gonna hand it over to ECMA's president, Dinsri, to open us up.
Thank you, Hannah. Welcome, everybody. Part of our journey, definitely we want to speak in English because our speakers are English speaking, but we also want to make sure we reach everyone. And so folks who have questions and everything, please make sure you put them in chat in whatever language is most comfortable for you. We will be able to translate and provide the language assistance anyone might need as they're following us. I think now might be the right time to broadcast. I'm going to ask our host to get us on Facebook Live. And
yep, I'm working on it. Thanks.
Very good. So to thank you all for your patience. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our organizers for putting this event together, to our speakers for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. We welcome you. We thank you all. My name is Dinsri Fukru. I'm the president of ECMAA. And as many of you know, Yekatit is a particularly special commemoration event that's been part of ECMAA's history for the last many years. Every year we partner with the Global Alliance for Justice to put an event together that helps us to reflect back and appreciate the sacrifice that people have made over time to protect Ethiopia and contribute to who we are today. Thank you. I'm seeing a message that there's an echo. So I'll ask others to mute while I continue talking, and I'll come closer to the mic. Thank you for that message. So we make sure that we recognize this day to make sure we learn and keep moving forward and pass our history to the younger generation. Yekatit is not the only thing that ECMAA does. We work really hard. We're a membership group. I'm gonna just make sure that we go. So Yekatit is not the only event that we plan. We work really hard to support residents from the diaspora who are members, who are residents of the New York tri-state area. That's New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York. And we work really hard to meet our mission with a very strong membership base that's got an 11-person board of directors and a member advisory council that's made up of 6 additional people. Our mission is, as an independent, not-for-profit association with no political or religious affiliation, ECMAA is committed to serving the needs of the Ethiopian community in the New York tri-state area. ECMAA does this through the coordination of cultural and educational activities and by leveraging the experience of its membership base to share knowledge, skills, resources with those in need of assistance. This is the work that we do. It's our focus. When we think about ECMAA, we of course think about our mission and our vision, but our primary objectives, the things that drive us in our programming, in our thinking, in our planning, are our 4 primary objectives. They are building a strong and active membership, sharing resources within the community, creating opportunities for the members of our community to connect with each other, and to promote our heritage. We cover, like I said earlier, the geographic area of New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We know today's call might have people from different parts of the country, but in our services, in our work, in our discussions in general, we're focused in the tri-state area and the residents. And we work with, to support families, the elderly, students, and young professionals and entrepreneurs who are in the process of trying, striving and succeeding here or struggling, so that we can make connections among them all. I'm going to take a few minutes to just give you some sense of what it is that we do. Again, a strong and active membership base that fully represents the diaspora community in the New York tri-state area ends up leading to a stronger community. So we work really hard to make sure that you and residents of the area receive information that's, relevant to you. We share information that's available within the community, outside the community. We ask that you share what you have and what you know, volunteer your time, attend our events, just get engaged in any way. Let us know what you think, talk to us in any way that you can engage. It's to the betterment of the entire community. Membership is encouraged, but of course we're here to help everyone independent of membership status. But it's an annual renewed, it's annually renewed, and it's $30. And where you can join is on our website. We have a very resource-filled website that we encourage you to explore. It's ECMAA, ECMAANY.org. /membership gets you to our membership page, where you can choose to either receive just our newsletter or become a full-fledged member with the suggested annual contribution of $30. We welcome more if you would like to give it. We also encourage you to please follow us on social media. We offer a newsletter that goes out every month, but they're in between different events that happen, things we know about that we share. And we encourage you to follow us on social media so that you can be up to date. We have a Facebook page where this event is being broadcast. In fact, we have a YouTube channel where we will be storing this video for the future. And we have an Instagram account. All of them, if you search for ECMAANY or ECMAANY Tri-State, you will find us, and we encourage you to like and follow us. We also share resources. Just last year, for example, we started an annual event that we're calling, Yulunta and Gammana. And it's talking about, the idea is figuring out how to make sure we create spaces so that people can talk about difficult things without shame and guilt. And we made sure that we created a mental health first aid training so that everyone can join us. Everyone can have some of the basic information they need to be responsive when people are struggling. Topics we covered include mental health and illness. We talked about autism. We talked about domestic violence. Not that these are bad topics. These are things that cover all of us, that touch all of us in different degrees. But our focus was how to create the space so that people can be free to talk and ask for help when they need it, and that the people that they go to ask for help can listen to them and respond in a way that's effective. So this is an example of the kind of thing we're talking about when we're talking about sharing resources. The college planning workshop going on, as you know, February, actually March, was Yulunta and Gammana, which was held last year on March 7th, was the last event we held in person before COVID hit. And as COVID hit, and as different crises hit Ethiopia and everywhere else, what we think about is coming back and getting centered in our mission and in our vision and in our objectives to figure out how we can be there and how do we adjust and respond to what's happening. So part of what we did was think about how to get ahead on information related to COVID relief and make sure that we are providing all the information so that whether it's a small business or somebody who doesn't know how to complete what they need to do to get unemployment benefits, they have the basic information to survive. And we basically asked who would like to volunteer to help, and we asked who would like help and tried to make connections. Other examples of virtual planning that we've done to be able to respond is we've had a college planning workshop, resume building workshops, real estate workshops. We've developed a resources page on our website. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a monthly newsletter where we create material, where we share material independent of endorsement, independent of anything else. We share information that could be of use to any member of our community. The third objective that we have is creating opportunities for members of our community, to connect with each other. We can be a resource as an organization, but we're so much stronger when we're connected to each other. And so these are things that we do to create social opportunities or educational opportunities where the primary goal is people meeting each other and sharing, knowing that out of that, there's a lot of networking and sharing of resources that happens. Our very well attended, very welcome new event from last year is in Nitawak, which was creating dating opportunities for the younger members of our community. We have an Ethiopian Day picnic, and we've held a spring fair in the past. Again, the primary goal is people meeting each other, because out of that, lots of good can come. We have had ECMAA Fitness Day, which previously we had called Youth versus Experience. Again, making sure that people who have things in common that they enjoy can get together to meet each other, and to, of course, not leave the youngest members of our community behind. We've had a teen experience, a workshop, and a children's story hour, so that the younger members of our community get to meet each other as well. So this brings me to why we're here today, which is the primary focus of what we're doing today here is promoting our heritage. This is the fourth objective that we have. We, within and outside our community, want to promote the Ethiopian heritage that we're proud of. And we want to make sure that that heritage, what we're promoting, is representative of Ethiopia and its diversity. And we want to make sure that we are connected to each other as adults, as people who have just arrived, as people who have grown up here, as people who have been born here. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity for everybody to connect in the thing that brings us all together, which is being of Ethiopian descent in this community, in the New York tri-state area. So an example of these kinds of events include our Yekatit 12 commemoration. It includes Amharic classes. We are proud to say we've had 3 rounds of Amharic classes, first for the youngest students, and then in the last 2 rounds, we've had level 1 and level 2 formal instruction Amharic classes for those who are older than 16. And we've been able to do this virtually over the last, during the pandemic, in fact, and look forward to starting our next class in March as a level 1 class. And of course, periodically, we have book reviews to continue to discuss what we do. So again, this is the focus of our day, and I'm gonna now turn it over back and just wanna remind us that again, we prepared this presentation today as a reflection of our heritage and looking back at our history. We are not a political organization, we're not a religious organization, and our work is not driven by ethnicity, it's driven by being a resource to members of the community in the tri-state area. So today's presentation is going to be fully focused on reflecting back and promoting the heritage, our shared heritage from the past. Thank you very much. And so with that, I'll pass it on to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Dins. I'm going to pass it over to Gash Brahane, who will be talking to us a little bit about Yekatit 12 and will be leading us in a minute of silent prayer.
Okay, now it's unmute. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished participants and ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all to 84th Yekatit Asraulet Remembrance Day program. My name is Brahane Taddesa. I'm an advisory board member of Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association here in New York. I want to say thank you to everyone who is participating for this solemn gathering to honor and pay tribute to innocent civilians brutally killed by Italian fascist army, and for our heroes who are sacrificed their lives for the sovereignty of Ethiopia. Just before we get started, I would like to tell you briefly about Yekatit Asraulet Remembrance Day. We have to ask ourselves, what is the significance of Remembrance Day? We have many reasons. I'm gonna say only a few. It is a national event to pay tribute for the infamous Addis Ababa massacre of Yekatit Asraulet, 1929, and to ensure that the innocent civilian brutally killed and our brave forefathers who have sacrificed themselves to protect the sovereignty of our country are not forgotten. It is also a special day to ensure our patriotic feeling against the Italians' fascist aggression. Also, it gives us the sense of belonging to our motherland and to reflect more deeply on the history of Ethiopia and to pass important heroic stories to the next generation of Ethiopians. Lastly, it's also a day to say for our forefathers, thank you for setting us free from oppression of the Italian invaders. Ladies and gentlemen, let us take a couple of minutes for a moment of silence for all who suffered on Yekatit 12 Addis Ababa massacre by Italian army, for all our freedom fighters whose memory we cherish, and those unsung heroes whose names we will never know. So we're gonna take a few seconds. Okay, thank you very much. Without further ado, I will leave it to our moderator as the Vice President of Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association, my sister Hannah Yusuf, to lead the remaining of today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Gash Farhane. So we have two guest speakers with us today. So the first one is Jeff Pierce. We're so excited to have both of them with us. Jeff is a professional writer based in Toronto, Canada. He's the author of Prevail, the inspiring story of Ethiopia's victory over Mussolini's invasion. I have the book here with me. It's an amazing book. I started reading it just recently. You can find it on Amazon. The foreword for the book is written by Richard Pankhurst. He also has become known more recently in the diaspora circles for his writing about Western media coverage of the evolving situation in Ethiopia. His book, African Ideas, How a Continent and Its People Changed the World, will be released early next year. So good to have you with us, Jeff. We're excited to hear from you today. We're gonna have a question and answer session after Jeff has his presentation. So we're gonna give it about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end. If you have any questions about what Jeff is going to be talking about, please leave your questions in the chat box below. And then once he's done his presentation, we can ask those questions and he'll be able to have a chance to answer those questions. Jeff, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
There you go. Okay, can you hear me now? Great, fantastic. Okay, please bear with me because I am not fluent in Amharic, and so I apologize if I butcher certain names or words. It is a great honor to be able to talk to you folks. Please bear with me as I fight my cold and my cataracts. Let's talk about this, and I'll refer to it as Yekatit 12 so that I don't butcher yet another Amharic word. I realize that the focus here is on Yekatit 12, but I want to bring us into the subject by providing some context on the fascist invasion of Ethiopia and the occupation. The Graziani massacre should never be forgotten, but my hope is that one day we won't be marking just this sad occasion, but celebrating how Ethiopians came back from it and recovered, how they fought and took their country back. I'm very aware of Adwa celebrations and the marking of Yekatit 12 and Patriots Day, but we need a wider awareness of the events before the massacre and what came after. And I don't mean just in diaspora communities. I still can't understand why this war isn't a bigger thing in world history and in African American history. And you can still find today in our own era, people peddling the nonsense that the war started over a border dispute. It was a clash at an oasis, wall in the Ogaden, and oh, well, that just got out of hand. No, Mussolini planned the invasion at least as far back as 1932. We know this because they tell us this. It's right here in a book by Marshal Emilio de Bono, who first led the invasion before Badoglio took over. He talks about the actual conversation he had with his boss as a kind of job interview to lead the invasion. So when you look at history books of the 20th century for general readers, or even history textbooks if you're lucky for North American high schoolers, if you're lucky, they do this war in a couple of paragraphs. Cut to the Italians conquering Ethiopia and Haile Selassie pleading his case in Geneva and getting ignored. What they don't say is how huge this was as a cause for the world and why everyone cared. When I say Italian-Ethiopian war, you've got to think on a scale like the bombing of Syria or the protests that we just saw in Russia. Huge. It was an everyday thing in the New York Times, in the Times of London, in newspapers across Europe and North America. And because the politicians wanted to sweep it all under the rug and let Mussolini have his way, ordinary people, both black and white around the world, wouldn't let them do it. So you have protests in Harlem, you have protests in Chicago, Los Angeles, London, Paris. You had African Americans who wanted to go over and fight. Only the US State Department denied them all passports. You had an arms embargo, which was incredibly stupid because, well, yes, it affected Italy. They already had most of their weapons getting into the country through Massawa, Djibouti, and there's Ethiopia, which can't get any or hardly any. And besides, the sanctions don't include oil. So guess who gets screwed? And yet, this is also what gets skipped over most of the time. If you look at how the armies were performing against each other, the Ethiopians were holding their own a lot of the time. What made the difference in the world was not just Italy's planes, but the Italians bombing Red Cross hospitals and then lying about it and using poison gas and then lying about it. And oh, by the way, when they lied, they like to make up atrocities and say the Ethiopians were using dum-dum bullets, which they weren't, that they used the Red Cross flag wrong, that they hacked captured soldiers to death. All the social media nonsense that we're seeing today was invented back then. The only difference is no digital, slower speed. You want to know how fake news got its real sophisticated start? Go back to fascist Italy. I want to read you something from John Melly, a doctor who was a dedicated healer, a Christian who was so decent, a guy who was practically a saint. It's from this book, and this is John Melly. He died for Ethiopia, if you can see that, and I hope you can if I'm holding it correctly. He died in Ethiopia trying to serve the cause. But he wrote this: there are some millions, I suppose, of what are supposed to be the bravest warriors in the world waiting to die for this country, and fight and die for it they will to the very last man. He's writing to his sister. But Catherine, they have no Red Cross whatsoever. If you want a sleepless night, picture to yourself the indescribable horror and suffering behind the Ethiopian lines when Italian planes, with no danger whatsoever to themselves and no opposition, have been dropping bombs on the Ethiopians for 24 hours. We have nearly 5 months to do something. So while we're here to talk about Yekatit 12, mostly we have to appreciate what helped make that massacre possible. And that was the whole world standing by and letting other atrocities happen in Africa in the 20th century during a fascist invasion. Now, somebody once asked me, how do you differentiate between colonialism and fascism? And I say colonialism is fascism. Calling it a colonial war, it makes you think of British redcoats fighting Zulus in the 1800s, and then you're lulled into thinking the outcome's inevitable. But we're talking about an era and a time when political states were equal. Ethiopia was a member of the League of Nations. So not to get overly political, but this is also why I completely reject the revisionist crap that promotes the invention of Ethiopia myth during Menelik's time. That was somehow a proxy for European powers, and that even Adwa was Europeans pulling the strings in 1896. Bull! Because when you do that, you are peddling this racist nonsense that Ethiopians had no agency, that they didn't stand as equals in the League of Nations, and they were just gullible dupes for all those decades. I reject that completely. You do that, you are one step away from buying into a racist idea that the fascist invasion was a foregone conclusion. It never was. So Ethiopian armies were doing reasonably well. They weren't exactly winning, but they weren't losing. So Mussolini drops more poison gas. He does more bombings. And I want you to think about Harar being bombed. It was an open city. When it was bombed, it made front page news in the West. New York Times, London Times. And George Steer, the reporter who broke the story, warned readers of the New York Times and London Times, if you do this, if you tolerate this in Africa, it's a trial run. They will use this method of terrorizing civilians and Europeans in Europe. He's the same journalist who investigated the bombing of Guernica months later in Spain. And what do we have about a year after that? Kristallnacht in Germany. In other words, I'm saying there was nothing inevitable in terms of the temporary defeat of Ethiopia by the invaders. Any population hammered down like that would suffer and retreat. Retreat, but not quit. On the very day that the Italian armored cars came into Addis Ababa in this kind of weird Mad Max motorcade with all manner of vehicles rolling into Addis Ababa, there are already resistance fighters in the mountains and hills surrounding the capital, taking pot shots at the Italian soldiers. I've read the reports from the British who were keeping an eye on things. Something like my third week in Ethiopia on a visit, I'm in Addis shopping, and I look at those hills and mountains beyond, and I think, you fascists are idiots. you know, this country will crush you. And in the end, it did. But when we think of the Graziani massacre, what we have to remember was this was a response to the Ethiopian resistance. It's 1937, and yes, half the country is occupied. Which, by the way, why do we think in terms of, why does the West think in terms of Ethiopia as conquered, but it's a French occupation for France? Funny how that works. It wasn't conquered. Ethiopia wasn't conquered, as the history books like to make out. The closest analogy I can think of is what we saw in Afghanistan. Patriots are in the hills and mountains, and they're not a cohesive group. Many of them are in individual units doing their own thing, following individual leaders. But back in the capital, things are getting very organized. So occupied does not mean beaten. There were people who were pissed off, seething with resentment and rage, and the fascists kept giving them reason. Again, we think of the Graziani massacre as the most horrific event, and it was, but it wasn't in isolation. You already had the sons of Ras Casa led to a public square and shot And the soldiers cut off their heads and displayed them in the Church of St. George. So resistance in the capital was organized and had already been in contact with Haile Selassie's people. Lorenzo Tizaz, the man who wrote the emperor's famous speech for the League of Nations, was running secret missions, sneaking in and out of the country. And we know a lot of this stuff because Ian Campbell, brilliant historian, a man I call a friend, has done the most fantastic research on what really happened. I wish he was here to give the address. He could do a much better job than me, but you'll have to unfortunately make do with me. And I imagine that most Ethiopians, especially of a younger generation, grew up thinking the attack happened because two young Eritreans, Mogus Azgadam and Abraha Debosh, threw their grenades, and that's it. That's what started it. Well, no, they did this because they were part of an organized resistance that was operating in the capital. Excuse me, fighting my cold. So Graziani's doing his PR thing of giving out alms, and he's not liking it. He even grumbles, "Hurry up, or we'll be here until dark." I haven't seen it all, but there is footage of at least some of the ceremony, and I've been told maybe catching part of the attack. I would like to see the footage one day. But we have still photos of this. We have photos of it actually happening. The grenades fly, and thanks to Ian Campbell, we now even know what windows they were thrown from. We have photos from the chaos. And there's the viceroy, the great hero of fascist Italy, running away before the shrapnel of a grenade rips into him. There's smoke. There are people screaming and running. And the secretary of the fascist party, a man named Guido Cortese, starts shooting people with his sidearm because he thinks the Ethiopian guests who are there for the ceremony are behind it. And this prompts soldiers to mow down the crowd with machine guns. And they kill thousands. So now the Italian authorities get the city to shut down. They want stores closed. They want every Ethiopian to get off the street. And that same Guido Cortese, back at the fascist party headquarters, he tells those within earshot, "For 3 days, I give you carta blanca to destroy and kill and do what you want to the Ethiopians." So now there's formal permission. And they make Addis Ababa into an abattoir. This is from Ciro Poglielli's book, which was published in the 70s by his son. He was an Italian journalist who was there, and he saw and heard what happened. Soon the streets around the Tukuls are strewn with bodies. I see a driver who, after knocking an old black man to the ground with a blow of a club, thrusts a bayonet right through his head. They're lashing people with whips and beating them with iron bars. This isn't just soldiers. This is ordinary Italians, members of the civilian population. They lock people in their homes and set their huts on fire, burning them alive. The doctor, Ladislas Shashka, who takes on the alias Sava, he writes years later, "Their desperate cries were heard around the hut, but the Italians did not move from the place till the cries had ceased. They were anxious that none should escape the fire." And one of the witnesses to this is a friend, a man I call my friend, Ambassador Imru Zelike. He was there. He was a boy about 12, 13 years old, and he is watching people get murdered and beaten to death from the second floor of his house. And then they come for him and his family too. They're kept in another place where they have to listen to victims, Italians this time, being tortured through the night. And the next day, they're forced onto a truck and driven all the way to the Denane concentration camp. When it comes down to it, Ian Campbell has estimated that at least 20,000 people are slaughtered over the 3 days. That's a conservative estimate. The headline for the story about it by Charles Martin, Warkena Ashate, in Sylvia Pankhurst's newspaper, the New Times and Ethiopian News, reads, "Cruelty after cruelty," and it fits. That's not counting those who were murdered at Debre Labanos. That's not counting half of the 6,500 people who were kept at Denane concentration camp. Many of those people died of starvation, disease, neglect. I'm going to hold up these photos. Some of you might have seen them before. These were taken at the Graziani massacre. That's just some of what they did. And if you want to see something truly grotesque, this is the Denane concentration camp, where 6,500 people were kept. About half of them died. This is another photo. Do you know what these are? These are postcards. Have you ever seen anything more grotesque in your life? You know, it's like somebody made a postcard and said, Dachau. You know, it's just appalling. So what I want to leave you with as we're marking this solemn, as we commemorate this, the horrors that went on long after those days, because it wasn't just the 3 days. They were killing people for months after. But what does this mean? What is the point of commemorating this? Now, for Ethiopians, this is a very special occasion, and they can define it themselves. They don't need me for that. But I'd like to share with you what I think is worth considering. When I was invited down to speak to the nice people in Silver Spring, Maryland, around this same time years ago, I went and played tourist in Washington, and I went to see the Holocaust Museum, which affected me deeply. And I wasted my time trying to convince them there, look, this is something you should devote a display to. This needs your attention. And they were very polite, and I got nowhere. And so year after year, people mark the Holocaust. And every year I think, when are you going to acknowledge this came first? When is everybody going to acknowledge that had you stepped up and helped African victims of fascism, you could have saved millions of European victims? That was George Steer's warning. Look what's happening to them in Ethiopia. They can do this to you too, but nobody listened. So we need to get the message out there about Africa's side of World War II, because for me at least, World War II really kind of began in 1935. I know that this event shouldn't have any clouds of politics over it. It's very clear that this organization that sponsored this event, that is allowing me to speak to you, is an organization that deals not in ethnicity, fine work. And unfortunately, people are making history political. And so there are some necessary takeaways for thinking about history today that I feel must be said, because I'm on social media a lot now. And folks chime in with tweets pointing out, so-and-so is TPLF or an Oromo extremist, and his dad was a collaborator for the Italians. And this guy is a son of traitors, and that guy, and so on. And that rubs me the wrong way, and I'll tell you why. You're saying that somehow treason is genetic. It's bred in the bone. And I reject that completely. The fascist invasion, the Graziani massacre, happened because of human failure, the urge to devalue another human being. And you can get there multiple ways. There are all kinds of roads you can take, but they all inevitably end up with you putting a guy who might have starved to death months later on the postcard of an internment camp. The Derg killed thousands more than the fascist Italians ever did. But today, I keep coming across this nonsense online, and it makes me furious because idiots say, oh, the Derg were all Amhara. Then another fool says, oh, the Derg were all run by the Oromo. And I just lose it. I want to scream at these people. No, you morons. They were Marxists, and they killed everybody. And I can introduce you to folks who survived the Red Terror. People died because somebody came up with a great ideology that allowed you to think of others as less than human. So where am I going with this? We're marking this event instead of the world, which should be commemorating it with us. But the world keeps thinking that Africans only fight among themselves. They think colonialism was 2 centuries ago, when it was less than 1, because they don't read books anymore. And when they don't respect you, it's not such a short jump to what's worse, to thinking they know better about how to solve your problems and then deciding for you. You tell me, when you look at pictures like this, do you see Amhara? do you see Oromo? Which ones are Tigrinya? Which ones are Afar? You tell me, because I can't tell. If the world knew about the Graziani massacre, really knew, if it knew about the Patriots and how they rescued a nation, we would be having many different conversations today. I'm now seeing attacks online trying to smear what Ethiopia was all about when Italy invaded a second time. And I know why they're doing it, because just like Adwa, Ethiopians had to come together to fight. Many ethnicities, one people who liberated their own nation. However you think of what's going on right now in Ethiopia, the enemy has never been the ordinary person from this ethnic group or that ethnic group. Ordinary bigotry can start in an individual, but it takes an ideology and an organization to formalize it, to systemize it, to make hate into something that you can summon or command. The real enemy, as I keep saying, is hate. The real enemy is ignorance. And hate and ignorance will take you places, but you don't want to go to them. You don't want to go to here. You don't want to go to here. Wish you weren't here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. Anyone, if you have questions, put them in the chat window so that we can ask Jeff. But to start with, I have a couple of questions for you, Jeff. So I grew up, I was born and raised in Addis, and I grew up hearing a lot about the victory of Adwa more than I heard about the details of Yekatit and the massacre that had happened and the number of people that were massacred in those few days. So my question for you is, although it is great that, like, we heard a lot about Adwa because it instilled a great sense of pride in us, how do we also make sure that as a country, as Ethiopians, we also remember the tragedy that had happened on Yekatit and the following days, and honor those that have fallen during those days? If you can unmute him.
Here. So technically incompetent, sorry. To answer your question, personally, I think it's only now that we're seeing, even in Kenya and South Africa and other places. I mean, the other thing too is Africans helped liberate Ethiopia with the British. And it's only now that Africans are coming into their own to get their proper due in terms of getting acknowledged as veterans of the Second World War. How does that relate to Ethiopia? I think part of it is we have to make it just beyond what happened at Yekatit 12. I'm sorry for my lack of being able to pronounce 12 in Amharic. We have to make it a wider canvas, because when I wrote this, I'm not trying to plug my own book, but this was very deliberately written to be a positive, uplifting story, because the entire world hears about African tragedies. You can stack, and I have a stack of books just devoted to famine, war, civil war, corruption, being taken care of. And so the rest of the world turns off. And I suppose even for younger Ethiopians, they go, yeah, I don't really want to hear about the tragedies, when in fact, the story has a happy ending. The story has a positive ending in terms of, hey, you saved your country a second time by coming together and fighting together. But this was also a part of it. I mean, people have talked to me about this being a movie, because it really is a movie, in a way, a real life movie. You had the country abandoned by practically, well, virtually everybody. League of Nations didn't do next to squat, and they're standing all alone. And now they're forced to fight, and then it gets worse, and half the country is occupied, and then it gets worse, and you have the Graziani massacre. And then you have the Patriots go into the mountains and fight. You have the resistance. And this country rescues itself. I think, and the Brits and the Allies like say, well, we came and liberated Ethiopia. You wouldn't have been able to liberate Ethiopia without the Patriots working away for about 5 years solid, wearing the Italians down. I've read the documents, well, the British keeping an eye on things, where the Italians are literally running away and fleeing and deserting. And none of this people know. And I think it's because as much as we need to mark the solemn occasion, educate people about this solemn occasion and these events, these tragic, horrible events, we also have to look at the positive to say, no, in the end, they win. So that's my sort of long-winded answer to your first question. What was your second question?
So my second question is, have you seen any lasting impact on Ethiopia culturally or politically from a wide-scale attack like Yekatit Asrahulet? So we've seen the effects, in the US from 9/11 and the Tulsa race massacre. Is there a comparable impact in Ethiopia, in your opinion?
That would be hard for me to assess. In terms of a cultural impact from Yekatit 12 itself, you're saying?
Right.
I think,
or political.
I think historically, one of the fascinating things about this historical period is Haile Selassie comes back, and I don't have the speech right in front of me, but he says very interesting things. And keep in mind, the British kept him out of the capital for ages because in their condescending paranoia, they said, well, these Africans are going to massacre the Italians the minute they get the chance as vengeance. And Haile Selassie comes back and he gives his speech on May 5th and says, do not reward evil for evil. Do not take any acts against, again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have a speech in front of me. Do not go after these people. Let the invaders go the way they came. Let's part with them, and eventually maybe they'll be friends again and we can move on. And so politically, the country had to do an about face 180 degrees to try to develop. And it didn't help, of course, that the British pretty much ransacked the damn country and pulled everything up, including an entire rope factory, and shipped it away and stole it. So I don't think there was time at the time to sort of reflect on what happened. But the other thing too, which was huge in terms of its impact, was, keep in mind, the Italians systematically slaughtered an entire generation which was educated to be technocrats in the country. There's an appendix. I can't find it. I should have bookmarked it for today. In this book, in Ian's excellent book, he has the entire list of what were called the young Ethiopians who were killed. They had a practice, you'll read about it in the book when you get to it, Hannah, but there's a practice, they said, taking you up to Rome. And that was a way to, they chained you, took you up in an airplane, and booted you out over the mountains. And they did that to, I don't know how many people. They slaughtered how many people who could have led the country, into the 20th century, into a new prosperity. They killed all of these well-educated people who were sent to Geneva, who were sent to Paris, who were sent to London, all of the educated class who were supposed to be running the country. That had to have a massive impact on how things happened in the post-war period, which is a tragedy. And we can get into how it affected Haile Selassie. Personally, I think it did. I think he was a changed man after it happened. Don't forget, he also lost a daughter who was murdered by the Italian fascists to this. So there are political impacts. It's just in terms of modern day, I was in Gondar, and I'd be speaking to people, and they knew who Tewodros was. They knew the story of Tewodros, but they couldn't tell you who Jagama Kella was. which is sad. They had never heard of him. They didn't know that this man was a war hero. So we've got to do, when I say we, I'm being generous in terms of including myself as an ally. There has to be a better case of educating younger people about what happened and how their history was sometimes erased, sometimes obliterated for political ends, and get back to what really happened, so they can understand where they are today.
Thank you for that. So there are a couple of questions that came from the audience. So the first one is, it starts by thanking you for your excellent research about the fascist atrocities. And the question is, why was it difficult or hard for the UN to acknowledge this as a genocide?
Well, are we talking League of Nations or are we talking UN? Because League of Nations stopped with World War II and then became the UN. They literally, after the post-war period, it was all politics and it's all racism, to be honest with you. The Brits were calling the tunes, and there's a chapter in my book which literally is headlined with what they said. They said, well, that was another war. It was very convenient for them to break 1935 to 1936 into a separate category. They just didn't want to let the Africans at the table, the Ethiopians at the table, to do the war crimes. And, you know, by any rights, Graziani and Badoglio should have been lined up against a damn wall and shot or hanged. Take your pick. Because that's what they did with Goering. Well, Goering committed suicide before, but that's what they planned for Goering. That's what they planned for Nazis. We had war crime trials over what the Japanese did. Where was Ethiopia's day? And they were robbed of this. They were robbed of this possibility to get justice. In the end, I don't think, it depends on how you want to look at it. I think, consider the example of Truth and Reconciliation out of South Africa. There is something, this is my own personal opinion, and maybe this is rose-colored glasses, but I think personally that there is something in terms of, I shouldn't make this a blanket generalization, but there is something a little bit more generous and humane in the African spirit in terms of justice than there is about the Western sense of justice. The Western sense of justice says, punish, let's go after him, let's chase after the guy. The African, if you look at multiple examples, is about, okay, how's this going to be constructive? How is this going to be useful in terms of the community? How's the community going to heal? So there's a reason why Truth and Reconciliation has been adopted as a model, flawed as it is, but it's an African model. You know, if you look back at how Somalis did justice, it wasn't, well, let's take out the guy's eye, you know, after assault. It was like, no, we're going to confiscate some of your camels and take those. And, you know, this is our way of punishing you. It was about healing and justice. And I realize that's a very utopian, rosy colored way of looking at it, but I really do think there's a difference. So yes, they were robbed of the opportunity, but in the end, what really matters, of course, is more about how we're thinking about these events today. And of course, another speaker will, I believe, is supposed to be talking about this, to come to a time where they were going to put up a bloody memorial to the butcher of Fazan in his hometown and make it a museum exhibit. And keep in mind, neo-fascists show up to celebrate it on the day of its opening is just disgusting on all sorts of levels. You know, you had Richard Pankhurst come in a wheelchair to London to protest against that at the Italian embassy, I believe. So justice is relative, and it doesn't matter so much how the UN thinks in terms of whether it's a genocide or not. How do we think of it as a genocide? How do we want to couch these events and learn from them today?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you one more question in the interest of time.
I'm trying to make it shorter.
Wrap up. And I would assume the answer is going to be somewhat similar to what you just talked about. So Mohammed asks, France and Great Britain protected the likes of Graziani and Badoglio from criminal accountability for war crimes for using banned chemical weapons, not only Yekatit Asraulet. Can you comment on that?
Well, I don't actually hear the question in that. I mean, it's a fact. They
Yeah.
did protect them. Badoglio was walking around free as a bird as a businessman, all because when the Italians switched sides, and history to an extent is a sales job we pitch to ourselves. We have to acknowledge that, history is either we're going to use it to learn from it, or we're going to sell ourselves on what great people we are. Canadians do this a lot lately in terms of, my gosh, we're so noble, and overlook certain really inconvenient truths. Italy has done this as well, although I see greater signs of them coming to terms more with their fascist legacy of late. But it is a fact that when the time came and the partisans of Italy were helping the Allies, it was more convenient for Britain and France to go, well, okay, we'll give you a pass, forgetting for the fact of, we make a differentiation in history and we think of the Italian fascists as less than Nazis. No, they were Nazis. Call them Nazis in all but name. The Italians still sent Jews to be slaughtered. They bombed Red Cross hospitals. They slaughtered scores of Ethiopians in terms of poison gas. They put them in concentration camps. What is different about that than what the Nazis did, except for scale and number? And by the way, they did these things as well in Libya, which nobody really talks about. They did these same war crimes in Libya. So yeah, there's nothing really to debate. What's scary is that the late Christopher Duggan, who wrote an excellent book called Fascist Voices, was getting the equivalent of cyberbullying and threats, because I spoke to him in person, and he was telling me about, he was getting threats, and he was telling it as it is, historical truth. He was much less opinionated than somebody like me, and he's just writing the plain truth, and they would go after him. And that's from the extremist right wing. So we have a warning in that situation that these people are not ready to let this go. We have to protect the memory of what happened. We have to protect the facts of what happened, so that, if I may, every time even somebody in the Ethiopian diaspora tries to screw around with the facts, for instance, I'll give you a very quick example. Somebody who he shall go nameless, but he went on Twitter and said, well, it was over a wonderful photography exhibit, I think, which was partly inspired by Maza Mengista's Shadow King novel. Beautiful photographs of patriots, especially female patriots. And somebody decides to go online and be a buzzkill and a jerk and say, well, you realize when this was happening, the Amhara elite thought they were not black, which is nonsense, which is not historically accurate. Malaku Bayen went over to speak to crowds in 1936 in New York and said, think black, act black, be black. Think about that in 1936, him telling a crowd this. That's amazing. And it's a historical truth. Where I'm going with this is, if you have revisionism in, say, your community, it also helps the idiots who are the fascists who are trying to manipulate the facts outside, so that everything becomes up for grabs and gets morphed and changed and warped. So we have to stick to the historical truth of what unfolded. We have to pay tribute to those martyrs. We have to remember them properly and remember what actually happened. Again, I meant to be brief, but sorry. I just feel passionately about this.
No, that's good. Okay, so I wish I can ask you all these questions that are coming through, but in the interest of time, we're gonna have to wrap up. Everyone who has a question for Jeff, feel free to follow him on his social media. Maybe they can ask you the questions that they have for you. There are a couple of questions about, what inspired you to write this book and such. So yeah, I'm just going to direct people to your social media, and then maybe you'll get your answer there.
Thank you.
So, but once again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for this incredible book that you have written. For anyone who's interested, you can find it on Amazon. It's so well written and researched. Thank you again, Jeff.
Thanks.
So our next section of the program is going to be testing you, our audience, on your knowledge of Yekatit Asrahulet. We're going to have a few poll questions that my colleague Adam is going to play. If you can type your answers, he will show one question at a time. It's a multiple choice question. So if you don't know the answer, you can just guess. So he will show you the first question with the multiple choices, and then you can just type your answer in the chat box. So it'll be interesting to see how many of those we get correctly. So Adam, I'm going to hand it over to you. Adam, you're muted, and if you
Oh, yes, thank you, Hannah. Yes, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So when we planned this event, it was going to be it was going to run 2 hours. So we had some questions planned as an intermission between our first panelist and the second one. I guess some of the questions have already been answered by Jeff during his presentation. It's multiple choice questions. I'm gonna go into the first question, so you can just put your responses in the chats. So for the first question, when did Yekatit Asraulet or Yekatit 12 massacre and imprisonment happen? Obviously, it's in European calendar. If you know it in Ethiopian calendar, you can also kudos to you. So A, 1896, B, 1902, C, 1919, D, 1937. Feel free to send your responses in the chats. Maybe for someone who had a lot of correct responses, we'll give out acknowledgement at the end.
I think everybody answered that correctly except for one person.
Yeah, well, very well. So it's 1937, February 19, 1937 European calendar. If you're looking Ethiopian calendar, it's Yekatit 12, 1929. All right, moving on to the second one. So what event preceded that provoked such an atrocious retaliation by the Italian occupation forces? Choice A, Emperor Haile Selassie refused to sign a treaty. B, Abuna Petros called for international intervention. C, Emperor Menelik waged a full-on war with the Italians. D, attempt to assassinate Viceroy Rodolfo Garziani. Again, you can send us your responses in the chats.
I think all the answers are correct except for 2 wrong ones, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I think Jeff alluded this was bound to happen anyways. I guess this is what broke the camel's back. The straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. Moving on to the third question.
You can tell people what the answer is.
Oh, well, I thought, okay, it was the attempt to assassinate Garziani. The next question ties to this response to this question. And then who threw the grenades to an attempt to kill Garziani? A, is it Balai Zallaka? B, Abraha Davoch? C, Moges Askedom? And D, B and C. I think Jeff mentioned their names or in his presentation as well.
Now we know people were paying attention.
Yeah, yeah. I guess, did we get some responses?
Yeah,
Anna?
so I think most people got the answer. So the answer is D, B, and C, which is Abraha Davoch and Moges Askedom. That's the answer. So I love that somebody went with A, Balai Zallaka.
Oh, well, I guess to the next question. Name the Ethiopian bishop and martyr who was executed in 1936 by fascist Italian occupation forces. A, is it Abuna Salama III, Abuna Petros, Abuna Johannes, Abuna Athnatios? You can send us your responses in the chats.
We're going to give it 5 more seconds. Okay, I think everyone got the answer this time. Abuna Petros is the answer. Yep, good job, everyone.
Very well, very well. Moving on to the next one. Name the anti-fascist resistance movement that formed in Ethiopia to fight against Italy's occupation. A, is it the Black Lions? B, is it the Black Panthers? C, is it the Walias? D, the Black Stars?
We're going to give it 2 more seconds. If you can tell them the answer.
Yes, it's the Black Lions, Tukur Anbesoch. And then we have a couple more questions. So the Yekatit Asraulet, Yekatit 12 Martyrs Square is found in which Addis Ababa neighborhood? Is it Arat Kilo, 4 Kilo, Arat Kilo, 6 Kilo, C is 5 kilos, D is Piazza. Sorry to mix the language up there. I would think this is the easiest question, especially for someone from Addis Ababa.
I think pretty much everyone got that one right.
Oh, very well.
So it's B, 6 Kilo.
Okay, moving on to the last question. In retaliation to in an attempt to kill Garziani, let's read it that way, sorry. The Italians massacred monks in which monastery? Is it Devra Libanos, Devra Mariam, Tana Charkos, Kidana Mehret?
Okay, so everyone has gotten this one right as well, which is very impressive.
Oh, wow.
We move on to the next one.
Actually, that was the last one.
Oh, that's the last one. So,
yeah,
so
that was the last one. Thank you for your participation. I'll go back to Hannah.
Thank you, everyone. So I hope maybe you learned a couple of things from the questions and answers. And if anything, it's nice to be engaged as opposed to just staring at your screens. So the next PowerPoint slide that we're going to show you is focused on the Yekatit Asrahulet monument that's found in Sidiskilo, Addis Ababa. So just a few facts about, around that monument. So Adam, if you can play that PowerPoint for us.
Sure. Okay. Should I go to the top or the bottom of the slide?
Top.
Top, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, present, sorry. I believe this is the present.
Yeah, so you can present it.
Okay.
የጾም ቀን የካቲት 12 አገር ተቃጠለ፣ እሳተ ገሞራ ወረደ ከሰለ፣ ጭስ አመድ አዋራ ሰማዩን ሸፈነው፣ ጥቁር ሰማይ ጥቁር፣ የቀን ጨለማ ሞት በእናት ቅድስት ሀገር፣ በጀግናው ህዝብ ላይ የጠላት ግፍ ቀንበር። ፋሽስት አስተጋባ፣ ፋስ ተሰነዘረ፣ በአካፋ መዶሻ ህዝቡ ተወገረ። አባቶች ታረዱ፣ እናቶች ታረዱ፣ ቤት ንብረት ፈረሰ፣ ከብቶቹ ተነዱ። ውብ ለምለሙን መሬት ደም አጥለቀለቀው፣ ቅጠሉ ረገፈ ደረቀ ቡቃያው። በረሃ እሳት ግለት አሸዋ አዋራ አፈር፣ ቸነፈር ድርቅ ድርቀት፣ እስከ ረሃብ እጦት መታሰር መጉላላት። ቅድስት ንጽሕት ሀገር ንጽሕት እናት ሽቱ፣ የሰው ሬሳ ክምር፣ አስከሬን ባስከሬን ጥንብ የሞት ቆሻሻ፣ ጥንብ የሞት ጭንቀት፣ የሬሳ ጎተራ፣ የጭካኔ አዝመራ፣ የጦርነት ፍሬ ጥንብ የጠላት ሽታ። ቅድስት ንጽሕት ሀገር ኦ ሰንደቅ ዓላማ፣ ኦ አንተ ነፃነት፣ አንተ መተባበር፣ ኦ አንተ ሆይ እምነት። በዚች መሬት አድጎ በዚች መሬት ሞቶ፣ ግፍን ተቋቁሞ ጠላትን መክቶ፣ በዓላማው ለእምነቱ ራሱን ሰውቶ። ሰው ያድጋል ሰው ትልቅ ሰው ይሆናል ታሪክ፣ ሌት ይነጋል ቢመሽ ዘመን ሲፈራረቅ፣ ትውልድ ይለወጣል። ይህ መሬት ቅዱስ ነው፣ ይህ መሬት አድባር ነው፣ የአባቶቹ ቃቢ አለ ያንዣብባል። ሞት ይቀዘቅዛል ደም ሲረጋ ፈሶ፣ ግን ምንድን ነው ህይወት? ነፃነት ለቆመ ጉልበት ተጨርሶ። ዘመን ያልፋል ዘመን ሲንከባለል፣ ህሊና ይወቅሳል እምነት ሲያወላውል። የአገር ንጹህ ውሃ መች ይደፈርሳል? ጠላት በወንዛችን እንዴት ይታጠባል? ድል የድል ድል ነው ተነሱ ዘምሩ፣ እናንተ የተኛችሁ መች ሞታችሁና፣ ይናገራል ቆሞ ስራችሁ ነውና። ተነሱ ዘምሩ እዩት ልጆቻችሁ በሰማይ ሲበሩ፣ እዩት የፈረሰው ተክቦ ተሰርቶ፣ እዩት እውቀት በርቶ፣ እዩት ሀገራችሁ የሺህ ዓመት ጎዳና፣ እዩት ሄዳ ዘልቃ እዩት ብልጽግና። እዩት ሀገራችሁ ኮከብ ስታበራ፣ የባህር አበባ የአፍሪካ ላይ ጮራ። እንግዲህ ምሽግ ነው ተራራው አገሬ፣ ወዮ ጠላት ነገ ወዮ ጠላት ዛሬ። የጀግናው ልጅ አጥንት የተከሰከሰው ምሽግ ነው ምሽግ ነው። አጋሙ ተዋጋ ቆንጥሩ ቧጠጠ፣ የተሰነጠቀ መሬት ጠላት ዋጠ። ዝናሙ ዘነበ የደሙን ጭቅቅት፣ ጎርፍ አጠበው ነጣ ሄደ ውሃ ይዞት። ቡቃያው አሸተ ቦምብ የገነጠለው ዛፏ ኮተኮተ። ፀሐይ በራ ወጣ አንድ አካል አንድ ህዝብ ተጓዘ ወደፊት። ኦ ሰንደቅ ዓላማ ኦ ኃይሌ ነፃነት። All right, thank you so much for staying with us. So we are going to transition to our second speaker now, Nicola DeMarco. So I'm going to introduce him really quick, and we're going to go to his part of the presentation. Nicola is a human rights activist in New York. His father was deceived by Benito Mussolini, along with thousands of other poor peasants from Italy, into leaving their families and going to Africa to colonize Ethiopia. In 2015, Mr. DeMarco was featured in the documentary film, If I Were That Warrior, directed by Valerio Siriaci. The film described Mr. DeMarco's work to campaign against an illegal memorial to Rodolfo Graziani in a small village in Italy. Mr. DeMarco earned his law degree from the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law and has served as a development worker in Ethiopia, Kenya, Namibia, and Angola. Mr. DeMarco had served with Professor Richard Pancrast on the Aksum Obelisk Return Committee beginning in 1996 and served on the Global Alliance Board from 2012 to 2020. He presently works as a court evaluator and guardian in the New York State Courts. Nicola, it's so good to have you here. I have watched that movie that features you very recently and immensely enjoyed it. If anyone hasn't watched that movie, it's available on Amazon Prime. If you have it, you can watch it for free. Very educational, very interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I just wanted to note before I start that it was my grandfather, not my father, who was lied to and brought to Ethiopia. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a deep honor to be with all of you today. Thank you to the organizers, the Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association, Global Alliance for Justice, the Ethiopian Cause, Hannah Youssef, Ato Barhani, Ato Kasahun, Wazero Ibainesh Asrat, Ato Danaka, and all the volunteers and staff. I am honored to share this forum today with Jeff Pierce, whose book Prevail was given to me by my family as a gift several years ago. It has been very informative and illuminating, and as you all saw a few moments ago, his passion is worth hearing and seeing as much as it is reading his book. I also wish to acknowledge the presence of my two dear friends here with us today who are also community organizers and human rights activists. Abe Markman, who will turn 95 this April, and is an inspiration to anyone who meets him or hears his passionate advocacy. His memoir, The Color of Time, is available on Amazon. Also joining us today is my college friend and fellow activist, Marika Alberg, who inspired me and taught me a lot about political science. Ms. Alberg recently retired as a history teacher from the Paterson, New Jersey schools, inspiring thousands of people, both inside and outside her classroom. Thank you for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the following remarks are mine as an individual. Trump is the world's Benito Mussolini today. We are in the midst of a struggle for humanity and democracy, not very different from that of the 1920s and 1930s. Remembering the victims of the 1937 Graziani massacre is one of the important ways we must learn from the lessons of history. Each individual, each child, each baby, each mother, father, brother, sister, cousin, uncle, who were massacred in February 1937 must never be forgotten. May their memories be a blessing. Elie Wiesel, who survived the death camp at Auschwitz, said, "To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time." We also honor and remember today the survivors of the Graziani massacre, as Mr. Pierce so eloquently put it. These survivors endured the physical as well as psychological assault on them. Dr. Germa Abebe, one of my colleagues and a man I admire and learn from, is also one of those survivors we honor. In 1986, Elie Wiesel, as he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, said, and I quote, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must at that moment become the center of the universe," unquote. What happens to Ethiopia affects me. I hope my comments and our gathering here today help us remember the victims of 1937 and the difficult lessons of World War II so that we do not repeat them. We are not helpless. We are instead empowered. In our election, we defeated Trump, and repelled his assault on our democracy here in America. But much more work lies ahead, clearly. Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Human progress is neither automatic or inevitable. Every step toward, toward justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. For example, if you're not registered to vote, be sure you register and that you never miss any election, no matter how local or seemingly insignificant. All voting matters. All elections impact our lives." Mussolini took dictatorial power in Italy with a march to Rome, with his armed black shirts beside him. Those were his QAnon. Those were his Proud Boys. Trump tried this, and we prevailed against him. Mussolini lied to my family as Trump lies to people today. My grandfather, Nicola Scavina, who I am named after, was born in an impoverished orphan in a small mountain village in Italy. I guess you could call it Italy's Appalachia, with no running water, no electricity, no central heat or proper medicine. Infant mortality was common, and death from illness or even starvation existed well before World War II, during Mussolini's reign in World War II, and after World War II. My grandfathers and others like him were lied to by Mussolini and brought to Ethiopia to colonize. All the news and information they received was pure propaganda, lies. Dissent and truth were Mussolini's enemies. As Jeff Pierce says in his book, the first victims of Mussolini's fascism were the Italians, and even his last victims as he fled for his life were again Italians. My grandfather was not a military person. In Ethiopia, he was a shopkeeper in Debrecen, also known as Bishoftu. He could be considered a settler. He sold many things in his shop, including water. When I was a child, he told me about his time in Ethiopia. Never a bitter word from him about Africa or Ethiopia. I was so happy and proud to see Ethiopia myself for the first time in 1996, 60 years after my grandfather had been there. I had the honor of meeting Professor Richard Pankhurst on this first trip in his home in Addis Ababa. Professor Pankhurst helped me begin my involvement in remembering the victims of the Graziani massacre and seeking reconciliation between Italy and Ethiopia, reconciliation with truth. I helped Dr. Pankhurst publicize the need for Italy to return the Axum obelisk. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Axum obelisk, and I think it's only a few people on this call today, it is now back in Ethiopia after being stolen by Mussolini. The 160-ton monument comes from the northern city of Axum, and he had brought it to Rome as part of his effort to humiliate the people of Ethiopia. Professor Pankhurst, his mother Sylvia Pankhurst, and numerous Ethiopian scholars and activists campaigned to have it returned immediately. They were joined in later years by Italians, Italian Americans, such as myself, and Pan-Africans all over the world, such as Rita Marley. Professor Pankhurst worked to have me appointed to the Axum Obelisk Return Committee, and from 1996 until its return in 2005, I did what I could to pressure the Italian government, Italian Americans, and others interested in this cause to successfully restore the Axum obelisk. And as Dr. Pankhurst indicated, and I wholeheartedly agreed, the obelisk and the related restoration of looted artwork and other items are in and of themselves very important. But those things are mostly symbolic when one thinks of the lives lost, which can never be restored. The restoration of the Axum obelisk or the shutting down of the Graziani monument are very symbolic and important, but must come with enduring peace and better understanding of our humanity, which is the ultimate goal. Those years campaigning for the Axum obelisk return were quite interesting and gave us a platform to inform the world, especially Italians, who were largely ignorant of the atrocities Italy and Mussolini committed in Ethiopia. Yes, in 1960, Abebe Bikila would run barefoot past the Axum obelisk in Rome as night fell, and crowds gathered to watch in awe and cheer him toward a gold medal in the Olympic marathon. But what did Italians on those streets watching Abebe fly by really know about what had transpired a short 20 or so years prior? Our campaign to return the Axum obelisk would constantly be intertwined with the historic facts and information that people could not and cannot today ignore as well. At one point, we were met with right-wing racist remarks such as, "You can have the obelisk back if you give us back the bridges we built and the roads we built in Ethiopia." My response was simple: give the Ethiopians back the hundreds of thousands of innocent people killed. Bring them back to life, and we could start to talk about the roads and bridges. That shut them up. At one point, the immigration hatred in Italy took the form of the culture minister saying the Axum obelisk would not be returned because, like so many immigrants, it was now naturalized, quote unquote, as an Italian property. Within a week or so, lightning struck the obelisk. For the first time in its 1,600-year existence, a bolt of electricity from the sky struck the Axum obelisk. Even the arrogant right-wing Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi and his hateful ministers were forced to scramble to pack up the obelisk and begin its return. They even understood how foolish they looked to the world. Richard Pankhurst first told me about the Graziani massacre, among other important information. The tens of thousands of victims of February 1937 will never be forgotten. We all must understand what happened and remember this massacre, or we are doomed to repeat these mistakes. In 1963, about 1 month after Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington, the Emperor Haile Selassie addressed the United Nations. He said, and I quote, "The Charter of the United Nations expresses the noblest aspirations of man, but these too, as were the phrases of the covenant, are only words. Their value depends wholly on our will to observe and honor them and give them content and meaning." I wish to end my remarks today with a few pointers on filtering information on the internet and in the media to get reliable, truthful information and facts so that we can be advocates for justice. Because whether we are talking about the US elections or matters in Ethiopia today or elsewhere, such as Myanmar, we must be guided by facts in the pursuit of the truth, not emotional responses to bigotry and false information. Let's be intelligent, rational listeners and readers and consumers of the news. My first suggestion, and I'll end with these, if you see a shocking headline or phrase or accusation, ask yourself, who or what organization is the source of that comment or story? Next, what is the person's possible motivation to lie, distort, or exaggerate? Many stories and quote unquote posts on social media can be filtered by asking yourself those basic questions. Also, remember an opinion column or an analysis is that writer's individual opinion. Opinions are not news articles. They may be based on facts and data, but they are intended to persuade you to a conclusion. So always look for that analysis caption or opinion caption. Remembering that difference will help you begin to filter and understand when you're reading or listening or watching something that is the opinion of a person rather than a report, to be objective and not advocating a particular point of view. Second, I recommend you use logical questions, common sense, when reading a post online or article in a newspaper, such as what proof or evidence of the accusation or news story is being presented. For example, if someone reports a car accident occurred in Addis Ababa and caused 48 deaths, don't simply accept the reporter's story without any photos or video of that accident. We all know that nearly every person, even many children in Ethiopia, have cell phones with a camera, and any reporter or journalist is not making things up will ask people, witnesses, for any photos or video they may have on their cell phones. Finally, when filtering what is truthful reporting or information regarding something you see on social media or on television or on newspaper, ask yourself, are these organizations you usually rely on, such as CNN or Tadias or the Addis Tribune, the Washington Post or New York Times, are they also corroborating or confirming the truth of that story? If not, be careful as to how accurate that information is. And also be very, very skeptical of a headline or posting that strikes a very emotional response from you or others. Those emotional or sensational headlines and posts must be carefully examined and not taken as truth until verified and corroborated, so as to avoid rumors and misunderstanding. With that said, let's stay informed, let's stay involved, voice your opinion, even if it is only within your home, and let's always remember each other's humanity and ability to grow and change while we share our opinions. I will conclude my remarks today with a quote from President Joe Biden, and then I will gladly take questions and comments. President Biden said, "To heal, we must remember. And it's sometimes hard to remember, but that's how we heal." Thank you once again for your interest and your attention.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for that, Nicola. That was very helpful. Multitasking here. So I don't see any questions for Nicola from the audience yet. If you have any questions, if you can drop them in the chat box, we'll be able to ask those questions, but I have one for you. So when I read about you and when I watched that movie that featured your work as well, I was just wondering how many people are aware of that there is an actual like memorial or statue, whatever we call it, for Graziani in Italy right now. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about like how we can get involved as Ethiopians to bring more visibility to this tragedy globally, as well as specifically, about this statue and what specific things we can do to help out with that effort.
Well, thank you for the question, Hannah. A lot needs to be explored with regard to Italy's facing its fascist past, and Mr. Pierce brought that up very eloquently. Essentially, when you look at Affile, the town where this monument was illegally and secretly constructed, it is the birthplace of Rodolfo Graziani. It's a small mountain village, probably no more than 2,300 people live in it. And he already has a private family plot with his remains there. What this fascist mayor, openly fascist sympathizing mayor, tried to do was build something, as he put it to everyone, to the unknown soldier. So he misappropriated funds from the province of Lazio that were designated to honor the quote unquote unknown soldier. And as you know, here in Arlington, Virginia, we have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for all the soldiers we never recovered or can't recognize. Um, and he tried to fool everyone into saying that, that's what he was going to build. When he finally got the last brick into that mausoleum, he said, "Oh, by the way, this is for Rodolfo Graziani." So immediately, people were up in arms, and he organized this ceremony with about, I think, about 100 to 200 people. Not the entire town arrived there, but it was still shameful. The governor of Lazio at the time, Nicola Zingaretti, uh, well, he actually became governor as partly as a result of this scandal, and he immediately shut it down. He said, "You have to have that money given back to the province because it was illegally obtained. This cannot be designated officially as the Graziani Monument in any capacity." That was the order that I understand came from the governor of Lazio. Now, does that structure, which is basically a cube with a door on it, no windows, does it still exist in Affile? As far as I know, I haven't been there because of COVID. It is still there. Um, does it have any of the remains or memorabilia today, February 21st, 2021, of Rodolfo Graziani? I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. What I do know is the fact that we are questioning whether this is still there and whether it is functioning and what is the status of it says that we've won somewhat of a victory, that it is not well known and it is not recognized beyond a few people within that small village. Certainly, the government of Lazio, the government of Italy, condemned it, and they do not want to have any part of it. So that's my short answer. I wish I could give you more in-depth information. I would fly over there today if I could to see what's going on, but I don't have anything.
Thanks for that. So I have a question and I have a comment from the audience. So I'll start with the comment. It says, "Thank you for being a great role model for justice for all, regardless of nationality or other differences." And I would echo that. And I
Thank
think
you.
everyone in this audience would echo that. It's something that you don't have to do, but thank you for doing it. The question
Thank you.
is, so someone is curious how you initially got involved. You know, you can talk about maybe in the retrieving of the Axum Elvis. How did you get involved in that work? How did you get involved in you know, with the Global Alliance effort to you know, have this cube, if you will, removed from Graziani?
Yeah. Well, I thank you again for those compliments. I just wanted to start by saying I feel that it's a duty for me to be involved, and it's not just with Ethiopia because my grandfather was there. You know, I'm very concerned about what's going on in Russia, what's going on in Myanmar, and I try to voice my opinion. A bunch of different streams, if you will, in my life came together in this one beautiful river of 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 interest. One of those streams as a young person was hearing about my grandfather having been in Ethiopia. He visited me when I was, about 13, and drew diagrams of his shop and told me about this and that. He's very, very positive about it. And then another kind of stream in my life is I have a big passion for music, so I love Bob Marley. And I was the kind of high school student who wouldn't just listen to the music. I wanted to read about it. So I'd pick up magazine articles and someone explained the philosophy of his music, of Rastafarianism. And I was like, wait a second, that can't be the same Ethiopia that my grandfather's talking about. And it turns out it was, and it was the same conflict, Bob Marley was writing about. And then when I went to Rutgers and met, a lot of activists, including one who's on the Zoom today. Uh, I took classes, and again, what Mr. Pierce described was happening. We heard a lot about the 1930s Harlem and African American reaction to the Italian invasion and occupation, and how it meshed with and built upon the civil rights movement and also inspired civil rights leaders. here in the United States. I mean, the 1930s and 40s, there wasn't even the end of Jim Crow yet. Rosa Parks sat on the bus in the mid 1950s, but people were being inspired by Emperor Selassie and by the brave patriots. And it's really, Hannah, it's almost, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it because I'm from the Italian side, if you will, doesn't make me less passionate for justice. I don't view it as us versus them, just as I don't see building a wall at our southern border as helping me rather than them. We're a globe. We're a human rights globe, a fair globe of fair-minded people, or we're not. So obviously Mussolini was wrong. I have much more in my Italian heritage to be proud of than some idiot going to a country and slaughtering people, innocent people. So I don't even want to compare him in the greatness of all the other things that I could be proud of.
Thank you for that. Okay, so one last question for you. Um, Thank you for the interesting talk. I wonder if it's possible and worthwhile to have a post-mortem trial of Graziani and other fascist leaders in Ethiopia, if not in Italy.
Uh, well, this is a very important topic. You can't obviously try a person who's dead because you can't sentence them to anything. So my legal training says, uh, you know, what we're doing today and what Jeff Pierce has done and what Richard Pankhurst and his family dedicated their lives to was being sure the evidence and the facts are in public view, that you never hide the ugliness of what happened. So he was found guilty. Rodolfo Graziani was found guilty and he was sentenced to a prison. He went to prison. Mr. Pierce probably has the exact number of years he spent in prison. I think it may have been 18 months. And then they just set him free for no apparent reason. What also needs to be remembered with regard to Graziani, and by the way, I'm all in favor of a dramatized trial of him. I'd be happy to be part of that. But the impact of the Cold War and extremism on both sides, the communist side and the U.S. side, has to be considered in all this. Not only was that the basis of Mengistu and the Derg, but it was also America's reaction to that, our support of Emperor Selassie, even as he lost his grip in the early 70s on popular opinion. And then going back to Graziani, one of the reasons why people like Graziani and other fascists and Nazis were given, a slap on the wrist was they helped find communists for the Americans. So Italy was in the midst, we almost became Yugoslavia. We were teetering on whether we were going to be communist or pro-American, parliamentary democracy. So people like Graziani had to be given some, favors, if you will, in order to root out the communists. So this was extremism in the midst of the Cold War that didn't benefit anybody, in my opinion.
Okay, so I was gonna wrap up, but okay, so I'll ask you one more question, and that's gonna be truly the last question we'll ask just in the interest of time. So again, everybody is very appreciative of all the work that you're doing. Are
Thank you.
there any other efforts to bring back any other stolen Ethiopian relics from Italy, similar to the obelisk?
Well, Hannah, when we lost Richard Pankhurst and his wife, uh, we lost a powerhouse in terms of advocacy, intellect, but his children carry on. Alula and his daughters, I think he has two daughters who are very active in this regard. There are things remaining not only in Italy, but in the British museums that belong to Ethiopia. One of them, I believe, was one of Haile Selassie's airplanes, named after one of his daughters that's still in Italy. And these were all things that were agreed to be returned to Ethiopia. So, like, for example, the Axum obelisk, that was part of the peace treaty. So it wasn't like we just came up with this idea out of the blue. we were enforcing the terms of the peace treaty. And so these other things, I don't have, an inventory, if you will. I wish I did to share with you today, but there's certainly the plane that's there. And before he passed away, Richard Pankhurst was able to get some of the most sacred uh, manuscripts from the British Museum brought back to Ethiopia. They're written in Ge'ez.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, Nicola. It's been such
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to hear
It's
from
my
you.
honor.
Yeah, we are all inspired by your story and what you're doing. So we
Thank you very
again
much.
for being with us. So we are just 10 minutes over, which is not bad by Ethiopian standards. So I am going to hand it over to Gash Barhani now, who's going to wrap us up. Thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a Siganalo.
Okay, thank you. We're almost 5:11. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that all of you well done at this event. I wish to express my gratitude to our speakers, Jeff and Nicholas, and the audience, of course, and the organizers of the event. This Remembrance Day could not have been possible without you guys' participation. Our thanks also go to the many friends who helped us through their donation of time and talent. Thank you for attending us. So follow us on the ECMAA website for future programs. Thank you.
That concludes our presentation, our programming this afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy
Thank
Sunday
you.
and have a great week.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.